Hello, everyone. Hi. I am checking in from a Marriott hotel in Franklin, Cool Springs, Tennessee, which is a suburb of Nashville. And I'm here for a business conference. It's called the No BS Business Women. It's a boot camp, and it's all about kind of getting your business in order, which is awesome. And I'm also here with my beloved Nathan is here with me, which is so fun. I'm pre-recording this live, so it's a look live, not an actual live. But in case you're new here, I'm Rosa Linda Román. I go by Rosa Linda, and every week on Tuesday at noon Mountain Time, I share a chapter of my book, Losing Sight of the Shore: How to Live on a Boat Without Killing Your Family. It's very timely to be sharing these chapters because my family is preparing to move on to another catamaran in the middle of June, which is currently in Spain. So in theory, this time next month, we'll be either on, half of our family, my husband and son, will be on the boat, and the other half, Ziva and I, will be heading to the boat along with Nala. So we've got some adventures ahead, and I will continue to share these chapters as much as I can here on the socials. But if you want to follow our liveaboard journey, our upcoming journey, I share that on my Substack, which is a writing platform. And you can find that at rosalindaroman.substack.com. All right, without further ado, let's get to this week's chapter. This is Losing Sight of the Shore: How to Live on a Boat Without Killing Your Family, Chapter 16, VHF Radios. When you're riding out a blow on a boat, the best and worst place to be might be one and the same. Being in an anchorage with other boats can be a challenge, with shifting winds, swinging, and occasional runaway boats. You are all sitting there at the mercy of Mother Nature. And if the storm system lasts too long, cabin fever can make an already tense situation even worse. But there are also a lot of good things that happen in busy harbors during a blow. For me, the best of these is getting a front seat to a lot of human kindness, plus the inevitable audio drama that plays out on the VHF radio. First, let me paint the picture a bit, using the example of a particularly nasty series of blows that came through the Exumas in the Bahamas, spring of 2017. As luck would have it, the Dawn Treader happened to sail into Elizabeth Harbor near Georgetown during the annual Cruisers Regatta Week. For people with kids, it is the perfect place to meet other kid boats. For people without kids, it is also a wonderful gathering place where fellow cruisers reconnect year after year. The Cruisers Regatta is a series of fun events that bring people out of their boats and onto the shore for everything from beach volleyball tournaments to dinghy races. During this particular regatta, we met several new families with kids and reconnected with some of the boats that we had met on other islands earlier in the season. Our family loved heading over to Chat and Chill, where there were sand volleyball courts, picnic tables, a little restaurant with great peas and rice, cold Kalik beers for the grown-ups, and a tree swing that entertained the kids for hours. The trouble was, the weather forced several of the events to be canceled, disappointing the kids and making for some really stressful evenings for the parents. One night, the forecast would have the One night, the forecast would have the winds coming out of the east, and so all the boats would pull up the anchor first thing in the morning and move to the far eastern part of the anchorage, where Stocking Island might offer some protection from the wild winds. Then the next morning, the winds would shift, and we would all have to pull up anchor, move to the western part of the anchorage, and start all over again, trying to find a spot with enough swing room to prevent your boat from swinging into another boat in the middle of the night. This was particularly challenging when you consider that there were both catamarans and monohulls in the anchorage, and these two kinds of boats behave wildly differently when the wind and the waves change. The very same current that might swing a monohull clockwise might not swing a catamaran at all, and vice versa, a fact that not every cruiser understands. This results in some too close for comfort near misses, a few hits each season, and plenty of sleepless nights for the crews. This is bad enough when one system moves through, but when you face system after system with all of the resultant shifting, moving, and re-anchoring, it can get to be too much. This is what was happening during this particular time in Georgetown, and tensions were high for several days around the anchorage. In times like these, a cruiser's best friend is the VHF radio. When you set out on a sailboat, you spend a lot of time thinking about the scary scenarios you might encounter. On both Hakuna Matata and the Dawn Treader, we tried our best to prepare for those. We got AIS, which is automatic identification system, and radar systems installed to prevent collisions with other vessels while underway. We bought life vests, lifelines, safety harnesses, and personal emergency beacons in case someone fell overboard. We turned on our anchor alarms and anchor lights to help us avoid hitting other boats in the harbor overnight. All of these super important and necessary, but all of these are super important and necessary, but in case these high-tech systems fail, the one thing cruisers definitely want to have is a powerful VHF radio. When it comes to your family's basic safety, if the high-tech toys are your house's security system, the VHF radio is your telephone to reach for help in an emergency. A lot of people already know quite a bit about VHF radios when they move onto a boat, but I had zero clue about proper VHF use and etiquette when we moved onto our first boat, Hakuna Matata. Like a puppy getting a quick nip from the mama dog when it steps out of line, other cruisers help you learn very quickly what not to do when using the VHF. As for what you should do, there is a lot to think of. Just like the walkie-talkies you probably used as a kid, you just push the little button down on the side of the VHF radio unit and talk. But that is where the childhood comparison ends, or at least it should be. On a boat and on islands where other communication options are unreliable or overly expensive, the VHF radio is your lifeline. And if you use it correctly or incorrectly or inappropriately, you can expect to draw the wrath of an entire floating community. If you know only one thing about VHF radio etiquette, know this. There are some channels reserved for emergencies and essential communication only, and no one should ever have casual conversations on these channels. In all the places we sailed, namely Florida and the Bahamas, at the time of this writing, that channel is 16. If you are in an emergency at sea, this is the one channel you should be sending your distress call on, because this is the channel monitored 24/7 by the U.S. Coast Guard and any other emergency responders. By the way, there's crazy, what are they, locusts or cicadas here in Nashville. So you'll be hearing that adding to this recording. If you are in an emergency at sea, this is the one channel you should be sending your distress call on because this is the channel monitored 24/7 by the U.S. Coast Guard and any other emergency responders. That is why no one should use it to tell their friends about a great fish they just caught or the latest updates on their wind speed. Because the way VHF works is that only one person can talk at a time. If Chatty Carl is blocking the channel, a true emergency call might not make it through. Done properly, a call on channel 16 might sound something like this. Dawn Treader, Reepicheep, with the first boat name being the boat you're hailing and the second being the vessel you're on. Then Dawn Treader might respond, Reepicheep, Dawn Treader here, can we go to 18? That is how the boat you are calling lets you know they hear you and asks you to switch to another channel where you can have a private conversation. It's important to note that none of these conversations are actually private. There is a high probability that someone is listening in, perhaps another buddy boat eavesdropping to see what the plan might be for happy hour that night, or out at sea to see if there might be something they can help with if the first vessel can't. In other words, even on the most remote islands, you should assume someone is always listening and conduct yourself appropriately on the open airwaves. For cruisers in Georgetown, Channel 68 is a bit like Channel 16. It is the channel for initiating a chat with someone before moving to another channel. This allows the cruiser community to keep in regular contact without negatively impacting any vessel that needs to communicate for safety on Channel 16. Channel 68 is also the place where people will go to send out general inquiries for the harbor, such as the pump out boat question I asked during the walk the dog incident. A Channel 68 conversation might sound something like this. Hang on, gotta sneeze. Maybe not. Okay. Don Shredder with the general inquiry for the harbor. Can someone tell me where I go in Georgetown to get a BTC internet card recharged? Then someone might respond, yeah, Don Shredder, this is Hakuna Matata. I can help you with that. Pick a channel. To which Don Shredder would pick a channel to switch to, which, from what I can tell, is just picked randomly based on the caller's favorite number, and say, how about channel 69 and up? Hakuna Matata would then say 69 and up to acknowledge that they heard and will meet the Don Shredder on channel 69. The and up part means that if when they get to 69, they discover that someone else is already having a conversation on that channel, then the two parties will go up one channel at a time until they find a free channel. Like Channel 16 for general communication, many old-timers in Georgetown and other places, I'm sure, consider it a great big no-no to chat on Channel 68. Combine this fact with the cabin fever that was setting in around Elizabeth Harbor during that wave of bad weather, and you can imagine all kinds of scenarios where things would get interesting on the VHF radio. The one that stands out most for me involved a guy named Saul. Every night at 8 p.m., just as people were settling in for the night, but before it gets too late and most radio traffic goes silent, cruisers will click open their mics and give a quick good night Georgetown across the anchorage. Depending on the mood in the harbor, especially if it happened to be a particularly trying weather day, some old sailor might respond with an inspiring quote to close out the day on a positive note. This would be followed by a friendly cacophony of clicks, the VHF radio version of a hear hear or a round of applause. After that, you could usually expect radio silence until morning unless there was some kind of emergency overnight. But some nights, this gentle evening sign-off turned into something entirely different, which is what happened on the night in question. On that particular night, a nasally, whiny voice with a thick New York accent came on the VHF and said, yes, I can't do it. I'm not going to even try. This is Saul, and I have a general question for the harbor. To which one of the many authoritative regulars piped up, go ahead, Saul, ask your question. That's when Saul asked a question which drew a reaction. Yes, I was trying to figure out where we are supposed to dump the jerry cans. Immediately, other voices started yelling at the guy, saying, the radio is not a toy. You need to stop messing around on here. This is not okay. Saul stammered and restated his question. Oh, I know it's not a joke. I'm just trying to get some information, and you are over here yelling at me. Back and forth it went on like this for a few minutes until someone else got on there and said, how about you both cut it out and get off the radio so we can sleep in peace? That was the end of the conversation that night, and I was left wondering what that was all about. The next day, I happened to be listening to the radio in the middle of the day when the same voice came on saying, yes, I have a general question for the harbor. When someone responded, telling him to go ahead with his question, he asked, can someone tell me where the nude beach is on Stocking Island? I chuckled at this, wondering if there was actually a nude beach in the area, but didn't give it too much thought until later that day when we were hanging out with friends at Chat and Chill, enjoying a lull in the weather. And the subject of this guy came up. It turns out this Saul guy was turning into the Anchorage's comic relief, and that he had been on the VHF radio several times in the past couple days. Then they recounted one episode from a few days earlier, which was the reason Saul had drawn the ire of so many cruisers. Apparently, Saul had gotten on the radio and asked, can someone please tell me when the bridge opens to Lake Victoria? It seems a kind, elderly-sounding lady responded, there's no bridge that opens to Lake Victoria. Well, then how am I supposed to get my boat in there? Came Saul's response. Lake Victoria is a small lake in the middle of Great Exuma Island where cruisers can go to the grocery store, do laundry, fill water jugs, or pick up supplies from the hardware store. There is a channel that runs into Lake Victoria from the area where all the boats are anchored in Elizabeth Harbor. This channel is the only waterway entrance to the lake, has a swift current, solid rock walls on either side, and a fixed bridge that is only high enough for a dinghy-sized boat to go under, and only one at a time. Which is why Saul's request was so hilarious. He was asking how to get his full-sized boat through that tiny channel, and one of the ladies anchored in the harbor took his call very seriously, saying something along the lines of, You can't take a boat through that channel. It's too small. Do you mean you want to take your dinghy through it? To which Saul responded in all seriousness, something like, no, I think you're wrong. I think I can fit through there. Most of the people in the harbor knew he was joking, but for those that didn't, this was a horrifying, dangerous proposal. According to our friends that had heard the call, several people spent a long time on the VHF radio trying to talk Saul out of this ridiculous plan. Ultimately, when others pointed out that this was a joke, Saul became persona non grata on the VHF radio for a lot of cruisers in the harbor. Hence the reason his voice drew instant angry reactions from other cruisers whenever it was transmitted across the Anchorage's airwaves. The funny thing is that nobody knew who Saul was because he was on the radio. It wasn't until we were at a friend's boat for dinner that we learned the jokester's identity. We were sitting there with this family, with kids around my kids' ages, having dinner, when the husband started speaking with that hilarious nasally voice. His kids started cracking up as the look of shock came over our faces. Who would have thought that Saul was actually one of our good friends, and we had no idea? His kids begged him to get on the radio again, and we all shared a good laugh as he did his best to annoy a few more cruisers that night. Was it childish? Yes. But once I got over my shock, I realized this was a relatively harmless prank that was spreading some smiles at a time when we were all needing a little comic relief. If he had done this on Channel 16, that would have been a different story. But in my mind, at least, this was all in good fun. Suffice it to say that you should never assume anything when it comes to the VHF radio, whether it is that your conversation is private or that everyone will play by the same rules when using it. You never know when Saul might be listening. And depending on the weather and the level of cabin fever setting in, you might find yourself delighted for the distraction from the more serious business of dealing with whatever Mother Nature is throwing your way. And that is chapter 16, VHF radios. I remember these moments with fondness and wonder what it's going to be like to actually be back on VHF radio. It's a very different world than then. That was probably 2017. And now we're obviously moving into a time we're actually going to have Starlink, I think it's called, on board. So we'll have internet, people will have much more connectivity. But at the time that I wrote this, VHF was it. So yeah, it's a fond memory, and I hope you enjoyed that. If you did like this, please go over to Substack and become a subscriber over there. You can do that for free or support my work by becoming a paid subscriber. I really appreciate everything you are doing, watching, and even just being here is fantastic. I'd love to hear some comments and see what you think about this adventure. All right, I'll check in again next week, and take care. Bye.